Beyond the marble gates of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, there once existed a world no outsider was ever meant to see, a place where power and beauty lived side by side, wrapped in silence and fear. The Ottoman imperial harem was the beating heart of an empire that stretched across 3 continents, yet its true stories were whispered only behind golden curtains. To the outside world, it was a paradise, rooms filled with silk, music, and light. But behind that splendor, it was also a prison. Hundreds of women lived within its walls, some brought from distant lands as captives, others born to privilege, all bound to the will of one man, the Sultan. Here, ambition was a dangerous game, and survival demanded more than beauty. Every smile concealed a secret. Every glance could change a destiny. Behind the calm of the palace garden lay rivalries that shaped wars, marriages that built empires, and betrayals that destroyed them. This is not the story of wealth or pleasure. It is the untold story of those who ruled from the shadows, women whose voices were never meant to be heard, but who changed history from behind the veil. From the outside, the Topkapi Palace glittered like a dream. Its domes and courtyards shimmered above the Bosphorus, and travelers who saw it for the first time imagined only luxury beyond comprehension. They were half right. Inside those walls lay unimaginable splendor, an unimaginable constraint. The imperial harem was more than a collection of rooms. It was an entire city within a palace. Behind carved wooden doors stood gilded halls, tiled baths, fountains whispering through marble courtyards, and corridors so quiet that every footstep seemed to echo through centuries. Yet, for all its beauty, few places on earth were more tightly controlled. Every woman who crossed its threshold left her old life behind. Some arrived as captives from distant wars. Others were gifted to the court as tributes from governors or merchants. A few were born within the harem itself, children of concubines who had once served the Sultan. Their languages, faiths, and names were erased at the gates. They were given new identities, new loyalties, and taught the language of empire, Ottoman Turkish, silence, and obedience. Within the harem existed an intricate hierarchy. At the summit stood the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, revered as the most powerful woman in the empire. Below her were the Sultan's official wives and favored concubines, known as Haseki Sultans. Beneath them lived hundreds of women-in-waiting servants and attendants, all trained in the arts of etiquette, poetry, and music, but also in the subtle dance of survival. Life in the harem followed rules as rigid as any battlefield. Days began with the call to prayer and ended with the quiet footsteps of eunuchs patrolling the corridors. The women were educated in language, culture, and religion, for the Sultan valued not only beauty but refinement. They learned to sing Persian verses, to serve coffee with grace, to dance lightly on marble floors. But beyond these lessons, they learned something deeper: how to read glances, sense alliances, and anticipate danger long before it appeared. The black eunuchs, castrated servants brought from Africa, guarded every door. Loyal only to the Sultan, they ensured that no man, save the ruler himself, entered the women's domain. Their presence created an eerie peace, order without freedom, security without trust. The harem was as safe as it was silent. To the outside world, these women were prisoners of luxury. But within those golden walls they became something more complex. Students, strategists, mothers, and sometimes power brokers. The empire's fate could change with a whispered word or a secret message carried through a servant's hand. Among them were friendships that felt like family and rivalries that ended in ruin. A single misstep, an overheard insult, a misplaced letter could mean exile to the old palace or worse. Yet for all the danger, the harem offered opportunities impossible elsewhere. A slave could rise to become the sultan's favorite, her son born into royal power. History would remember several such women whose brilliance and ambition reshaped the empire itself. At night, when the palace lanterns flickered across mosaics of blue and gold, the harem grew still. The Bosphorus breeze drifted through latticed windows, carrying the distant hum of Istanbul beyond. For the women within, the outside world might as well have been another planet. They lived inside a fortress of beauty, guarded by silence, bound by ceremony, but pulsing with hidden life. The harem was not a single story. It was hundreds of stories woven together, tales of hope, of fear, of love, and of power. Behind the golden walls, women learned that influence could bloom even in captivity, and that survival required more than submission. It required intelligence, patience, and a heart that could endure both envy and loss. They were unseen by the empire, yet they were its heartbeat. And though the world beyond the gates believed the harem to be a cage, for some it became a throne. To outsiders, the harem was a world of jewels and perfumes, a place of leisure, love, and beauty. But behind the silks and music was another reality: politics. The Ottoman harem was not simply the sultan's private household. It was a living machine of influence and strategy, where women learned to rule without ever leaving its walls. At its center stood the Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother, the only person whose authority could rival his own. She controlled the inner court, managed appointments, and often advised her son on matters of state. Her word could elevate a servant to luxury or send a rival into exile. Even the empire's highest officials bowed to her power, for she was seen as the mother of all Ottomans. Around her, the sultan's favorites and concubines formed alliances as subtle and dangerous as any war council. Each woman sought favor not only for herself, but for her children, for the birth of a son could mean the rise of a dynasty. In the harem's polished halls, whispers were more powerful than armies. Few wielded this power with more brilliance than Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana. Born a slave from Eastern Europe, she rose from captivity to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, something almost unheard of. Hürrem's intelligence and charm captivated the Sultan, but it was her political mind that made her legend. She corresponded with rulers of Europe, influenced state affairs, and even played a role in shaping succession. Through her, the harem became an invisible arm of empire. Decades later, Kösem Sultan, another former slave, would carry that influence even further. As the mother and regent to sultans, she effectively ruled the Ottoman Empire for years, her decisions affecting wars, treaties, and royal successions. But her reign also showed the peril of such power. Alliances crumbled, loyalties shifted, and betrayal often came from within. Within the harem, every conversation was measured, every smile calculated. Behind the veil of elegance lay an arena where survival demanded both grace and strategy. Women could not fight on battlefields, yet they fought daily, when armed with words, with silence, and with intelligence sharper than any sword. The empire's most guarded world was, paradoxically, its most political. While men waged wars in distant lands, the fate of those wars was often decided by the quiet influence of women behind the curtains. Women who were never meant to be seen, yet left their mark on the course of history. In the Ottoman harem, beauty was power, but it was also peril. Every woman who lived behind those golden walls was judged not only by her charm or grace, but by how long her allure could hold the sultan's gaze. A glance could raise a servant to the highest rank, Yet the loss of favor could cast her into silence and obscurity overnight. The women of the harem were trained from the moment they arrived. Tutors taught them to sing in Persian, to play the oud and tambourine, to pour coffee without spilling a drop. They learned to walk with elegance, to smile at the right moment, and to keep their voices soft, even when their hearts were breaking. Their beauty was polished like a gemstone, but their emotions were caged. Each evening, as candles glowed through latticed screens, the palace felt like a stage. The Sultan might summon one of his favorites for music, poetry, or company. For the chosen, the honor could bring wealth and rank. For those left waiting, it meant another night of wondering whether their light was fading. Behind jeweled doors, every gesture mattered. A misplaced word, an envious glance, even a whisper could shift destinies. The harem was a world built on competition. Women who had once shared laughter became rivals in the quietest of wars. Gifts and gossip carried equal weight. Some learned to form alliances, protecting each other from jealousy and plots. Others found themselves caught in schemes that ended in exile to the Eski Saray, the old palace, a place where forgotten women lived out their days behind grey walls. To live in the harem was to understand that beauty was never truly one's own. It belonged to the empire, to the sultan, to the system that demanded perfection. For every woman crowned with favor, 100 more faded into silence. Their names vanished from history, their faces remembered only in the glimmer of painted tiles. Yet even under such pressure, some women found resilience. They learned to use intelligence where beauty failed, to navigate the delicate hierarchy with poise and patience. A kind word to a eunuch, a well-timed poem, or an act of compassion could secure a quiet kind of power, influence disguised as grace. In the quiet of the harem gardens, where fountains trickled and jasmine perfumed the night air, these women dreamed not of escape, but of remembrance. To be forgotten was the true punishment. To be remembered, even in whispers, was victory. The harem may have glittered with gold, but its true currency was endurance. And for every woman who rose through beauty, another learned the harder art, how to survive when beauty no longer protected her. The harem was a kingdom of women, but it was surrounded by walls of silence, guarded by men who could never truly belong to either world. These were the black eunuchs, the unseen watchers of the Ottoman court. They were the eyes, the ears, and the hands of the Sultan's command, bound by loyalty, discipline, and secrecy. Taken from distant lands in childhood and brought to serve the empire, the eunuchs lived their entire lives within palace walls. They were trusted to guard what others could never approach: the Sultan's family, his wives, and his children. Their leader, the chief black eunuch, Kuzlar, held immense authority. His position stood just below the Grand Vizier, giving him influence over both the inner palace and the empire's most private affairs. It was through these eunuchs that messages passed, orders were delivered, and secrets were kept. They controlled who could enter or leave the harem, deciding which woman would see the Sultan and which would be forgotten. To cross them was to invite ruin, yet their presence also offered protection, for without their vigilance, the harem's fragile balance could not survive. Beyond the human walls stood the architectural ones, high, unbroken, and guarded day and night. The harem's gates opened only for processions, births, or death. The women who lived inside could hear the city's heartbeat from afar, the call to prayer, the sound of carriages, the sea, yet they could never touch it. For the outside world, the harem was a mystery too sacred to approach. For those within, it was both safety and captivity. Between the watchers and the walls lay a silence so complete that it became part of life itself. Inside that silence, power whispered, love struggled, and history was rewritten, unseen by the world beyond the gates. In the heart of the harem, where silence ruled and every step was watched, a few women dared to rewrite their fate. They rose not through rebellion, but through brilliance, turning obedience into strategy and servitude into influence. These women did not simply survive the empire's most guarded world, they shaped it. Among them, none shone brighter than Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxelana. Once a slave from Eastern Europe, she was brought to the palace as a concubine in the early 16th century. But Hürrem's wit, intelligence, and spirit soon caught the attention of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the most powerful ruler of his time. What began as favor turned into an unprecedented bond. Against centuries of Ottoman custom, Suleiman made Hürrem his legal wife, a privilege no concubine had held in generations. She became his confidant, his political advisor, and the mother of several of his children. Her letters to foreign leaders revealed a mind capable of diplomacy and foresight. Within the walls of the harem, she helped influence alliances, peace treaties, and even the royal succession. But power came with danger. Rival concubines and court officials despised her influence, calling her the woman who ruled the sultan. Yet her power was undeniable. Through Hürrem, the harem became more than a private sanctuary. It became a political institution, one that could steer the empire itself. A century later, another woman would rise even higher, Kösem Sultan. Captured as a young girl from Greece, she was chosen for her grace and intelligence and became the favorite of Sultan Ahmed. When her sons ascended the throne, she ruled as Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan, and for a time as regent, commanding armies and appointing viziers. Kösem's reign was one of both glory and peril. She was revered for her wisdom and generosity, but feared for her ability to manipulate court politics. Her power was so vast that ambassadors in Europe referred to her as the real ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Yet her end was as tragic as her rise was brilliant. In the deadly web of palace intrigue, she was murdered by rivals who sought her throne of influence. Through these women, the harem's purpose transformed. What had begun as a symbol of confinement became an arena of strategy and intellect. The empire's fate no longer rested solely in the council halls or on the battlefield. It also took shape in whispered conversations behind silk curtains. Even those who did not rule directly left their mark. The mothers of future sultans taught diplomacy, loyalty, and cunning to their sons, shaping rulers long before they ascended the throne. The palace, for all its secrecy, became a school of leadership hidden behind beauty. The world beyond the palace walls saw the harem as a place of indulgence and leisure. In truth, it was a theatre of power, and its greatest actors were women whose names time could not erase. They proved that even behind locked doors, influence could move empires. Their legacy stands as one of history's quietest revolutions, born not from armies or crowns, but from voices that the world was never meant to hear. No empire lasts forever. The Ottoman harem, once the beating heart of a world-spanning dynasty, began to fade long before the empire itself collapsed. Its decline was not sudden, but slow, marked by the passing of eras and the quiet crumbling of traditions that had ruled for centuries. By the late 18th century, the empire was changing. The Ottoman sultans faced pressure from Europe, not only from armies, but from new ideas. Enlightenment thought, modernization, and diplomacy began to reshape the empire's foundations. The court that had once stood apart from the world could no longer remain untouched. The harem once a center of political power, began to lose its influence. The age of powerful women like Kosem and Hurrem was gone. New rulers, such as Sultan Mahmud II, introduced sweeping reforms that weakened the authority of palace women and curtailed the influence of the eunuchs who guarded them. The harem still existed, but it became more symbolic and a remnant of an older time when whispers behind veils could alter the fate of nations. Western visitors who came to Istanbul in the 19th century were both fascinated and bewildered by the stories they heard. To them, the harem was an exotic mystery, a place of beauty, secrecy, and temptation. But what they saw or imagined was only a shadow of what it had once been. Behind its ornate walls, fewer women lived, and their lives were quieter, their reach limited. By the late 1800s, modernization had reached even the palace. New palaces like Dolmabahce replaced the old Topkapi, filled with European art, crystal chandeliers and grand halls that reflected a different world. The harem moved with the court, but its influence was now confined to ceremony and tradition. The days when a single woman could shape imperial policy or control the throne were gone. When the Ottoman Empire finally fell after World War I, the last remnants of the harem disappeared with it. In 1924, with the rise of the Turkish Republic under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the palace gates were opened to the public. The harem that had once been the most secret place in the empire became a museum. Its corridors silent, its rooms empty but for echoes of the past, yet even in its ruin, the harem left behind something timeless: stories. Stories of women who had lived, loved, fought, and ruled from behind latticed windows. Stories that refused to be buried under history's dust. The empire that had sought to control every whisper could not silence their memory. The harem's walls may have fallen, but its secrets still linger, carved into marble, painted on tiles, and remembered in the hearts of those who still wonder what truly happened behind those golden doors. The story of the Ottoman harem is not just about silk and splendor, nor about confinement and power. It is about humanity itself. Behind its marble walls lived women from every corner of the world, captured, chosen, or born into a destiny they could never escape. Some rose to rule empires, others were lost to time, but all of them shared the same horizon, a life defined by silence, beauty, and survival. For centuries, outsiders saw the harem as a symbol of mystery, imagining it as a world of pleasure or cruelty. But the truth was far more complex. It was a reflection of empire, its grandeur, its fragility, and its unspoken fears. Every rivalry mirrored a war beyond the palace. Every alliance echoed politics that shaped the fate of millions. The women of the harem were never meant to be remembered, yet their stories endured. Through art, letters, and the quiet traces of history, they whisper still of ambition, courage, and endurance. The Sultan's court may have vanished, but the echoes of their lives linger in every tile, every garden, every shadowed corridor of the Topkapi Palace.